Bible Verse Daily. Learn one verse every day. Matthew chapter 6 verse 33 is one of the most straightforward-sounding verses in the Sermon on the Mount, and yet its simplicity conceals a radical claim. Seek first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. It sounds like a formula. Prioritize spiritual things and practical needs will follow. But understanding what Jesus actually meant requires knowing what came immediately before it, because verse 33 is the conclusion of an argument, not an opening statement. Jesus has spent the previous 9 verses talking directly about anxiety. Do not worry about food. Do not worry about clothing. Look at the birds of the air and the flowers of the field. He is not telling his audience to be more spiritual in a vague sense. He is speaking directly to people whose mental and emotional energy is being consumed by survival concerns, economic insecurity, the gap between what they need and what they have. And into that specific anxiety, he places one word that does all the work: first, not instead, not only, first. The word implies that seeking the kingdom is a reordering of an existing priority list, not the erasure of every other concern. The practical needs are real. Jesus acknowledges them. What he is challenging is what gets to stand at the top. The Sermon on the Mount, recorded in Matthew chapter 5 through 7, is the longest single block of Jesus' teaching in the New Testament. The setting is a hillside in Galilee, and the audience is described in Matthew chapter 4 verse 23 through 5-1 as including the sick, the demon-possessed, and the afflicted, large crowds from all over the region. These were not wealthy people attending a spiritual retreat. Many of them were day laborers, fishermen, farmers, people whose existence depended on whether the harvest came in, whether the fishing nets filled, whether the Roman tax collectors took too much. The anxiety Jesus addresses in Matthew chapter 6 verse 25 through 34 was not the low-grade background worry of people who had enough but wanted more. It was the grinding, legitimate anxiety of people who genuinely did not know where the next meal was coming from. That is why Jesus uses such specific physical examples. Do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, what you will wear. He is naming the exact fears that dominated the daily mental landscape of his listeners. The command to seek first is therefore not directed at comfortable people who have already secured their basics and need to add spirituality. It is directed at people for whom survival itself is uncertain. The phrase kingdom of God is central to Matthew chapter 6 verse 33, and understanding it properly requires stepping back from the idea of a physical location or a future state and grasping what Jesus meant by it. In the teaching of Jesus, the kingdom, in Greek basileia to theo, referred to the reign of God, the realm or domain where God's will is fully operative. When Jesus taught his disciples to pray, "Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven," he was making the same equation. The kingdom coming is God's will being done. The kingdom is wherever God's authority is acknowledged and acted on. The word first, Greek proton, means first in sequence or priority before other things. It is a positional word. Jesus is not saying ignore your other needs. He is saying put the question of God's reign at the front of how you make decisions about your life, your resources, your time, your attention. And his righteousness adds another dimension. Dikaiosine in Greek means rightness, justice, alignment with God's character. To seek his righteousness is to want to live in accordance with the way God actually is, not just to access his benefits. The seeking Jesus describes is active, ongoing, and comprehensive. It is a life organized around a certain orientation, not a transaction you complete once. The promise at the end of Matthew chapter 6 verse 33, "And all these things will be added to you," has been read in strikingly different ways, and the differences carry real pastoral weight. In the prosperity gospel tradition, the verse is often presented as a financial principle. Seek God first, and material prosperity will follow as a divine reward. This reading has been enormously popular, particularly in contexts of economic hardship where the promise of material blessing is powerful and attractive. Most biblical scholars argue that this reading takes the verse out of its context and makes a claim that Paul, Peter, and the earliest Christians, who frequently experienced poverty and persecution, would not have recognized as consistent with their experience. A more careful reading notes that all these things Jesus refers to are specifically food and clothing, the basic necessities of survival. He is not promising wealth. He is promising that those who orient their lives around God's kingdom will not be abandoned to die of starvation. In the broader gospel narrative, Jesus himself had nowhere to lay his head. The apostles faced imprisonment and execution. So the promise of provision must be understood within the framework of God's faithfulness over a life, not as a guarantee of comfort in any particular season. The point is about where you look first, not what you receive first. The way most people attempt to apply Matthew chapter 6 verse 33 is to add a spiritual practice to the front of their day. A morning Bible reading, a prayer before breakfast, a few minutes of devotional content before the workday starts. And while none of those things are bad, they can become a way of checking the seek first box without actually reorganizing anything. What Jesus is describing is more comprehensive than a morning routine. He is talking about a governing orientation that shapes how you make decisions about your money, your time, your relationships, your ambitions, your fears. What would it mean to ask in each area of your life whether God's reign is actually first in how you are navigating it? Not first in the sense of mentioned first, but first in the sense of the organizing principle. Most of us have an implicit priority ordering that shapes our daily choices, and God is somewhere in it, perhaps sincere and genuine, but not necessarily first in any functional sense. The practical work of this verse is honest inventory, not judgment, not guilt, but honest reckoning. Where is the kingdom actually placed in how I make decisions about my anxiety, my money, my time, my ambitions? And what would first actually look like, not as a spiritual feeling, but as a lived reality? Matthew chapter 6 verse 33 concludes a section about anxiety and material need addressed to people who were genuinely poor. Jesus does not dismiss their practical concerns, but calls them to put the question of God's reign ahead of those concerns as the organizing principle of their lives. The kingdom of God is not a place but the domain where God's will is fully operative. The promise of provision is honest and bounded. Basic needs, not prosperity. And the word first is doing all the work, indicating not a spiritual feeling but a functioning priority. If this verse study helped you go deeper, please like, comment, and subscribe to Bible Verse Daily for a new verse study every week. Hit the bell notification so you never miss one. New verse studies every week.